You're watching FRCD on CAN TV. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is the Region 1 Parent Training and Information Center of Illinois. You can reach us at 312-939-3513. Email us at info@frcd.org and visit our website at www.frcd.org. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter at FRCDPTI and subscribe to our YouTube page at FRCD1231. We also invite you to like us on Facebook. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is not a law firm or legal service agency. Family Resource Center on Disabilities will not provide any type of services that may be construed as practicing law, including but not limited to giving legal advice, drafting legal documents, or representing families in any type of legal proceeding. Hi, my name is Paula Wills and you're watching FRCD on CAN TV, where we discuss special education, parent advocacy, and resources for families of children with disabilities. And today we are continuing our conversation on navigating the IEP process with a focus on least restrictive environment and special considerations and how it helps the special education process and students navigating through the general ed program. I would also like to introduce, almost forgot, I would like to introduce again my friend and colleague Zabita Pasha.
Hey Paula, glad to be here.
Glad to have you back as always. And I also want to extend a congratulations to Zabita. Over the past weekend, Zabita and our executive director, Michelle Phillips, participated in the annual TASH conference where they both sat on two different panels representing parents in the special education process. We actually have a few photos about from that conference. And Zabita, could you, before I even have you tell us about the conference, your presentation, I want everyone to kind of get an understanding of what TASH does and how they help families and disabilities overall.
So TASH is an organization that advocates for people with disabilities and their rights, accessibility, equity, integration, and inclusion. This year's theme in their national conference that was in St. Louis was equity. And with that, the equity is underlining integration in the community, employment, inclusion overall. So TASH is one of the pioneers, in advocating for people with disabilities, and the range it goes from school-age students all the way to adults. Their focus is literally inclusion in the community, keeping the job, getting the first job, keeping the first, that job is a huge deal for our people with disabilities. So during that panel, my portion of the discussion was literally the parent expectation on a big, huge piece of transition, which is employment. And I will really want to talk about that at a next session, which is a very large, that encompasses many layers of supports that our kids need before they head to the real world. So it was very, very nice to have that conversation with professionals, researchers, and also a person with a disability that gives their perspective on how the services and supports supposed to be provided. Me, as the transition, at the beginning of the transition level with my child, I gave my expectation and what should work and what should not work. And like I said, the Frenchman said, only people who does not do anything would not make mistakes. For that to be said, we need to report accurate data to see how can we address and bridge those gaps. Because without reporting those data, all of those research and effort, they are going to be in vain.
And it's also a group effort. You mentioned researchers, educators,
business people.
People with disabilities.
And a businessman, if you remember, who was there, he is employing only and solely people with disabilities. And his presentation was so fascinating because he took the people with disabilities from the workshop
That's
to the
right.
work, to the real work.
Competitive employment.
Competitive employment, and for that to happen, the people, they need a lot of skills, they need different set of skills, and to take them from that very, very restrictive environment for employment, to take them out to the real world and make the integration happen, it's huge, it's big, and I was just elated to be among those, and discuss those issues. And again, us parents have to have high expectations. Disability does not mean unable. Disability means able just in a different way, and able with the right support and services. So that's my definition again of disability.
Absolutely, and which kind of goes into what we're discussing today with least restrictive environment and special considerations, which are additional support so that students can access the general curriculum.
Correct.
But at this point, I was there, and I was super proud to have
Thank you.
Zavita and our executive director, Michelle, representing parents and giving that perspective as other decision makers, discuss navigating just disabilities overall. Because you know what, you say it better, for us or without us.
Oh,
Yeah,
nothing about us without us.
Thank you.
And that's something that I have learned throughout my daughter's support at home, in the community, and of course supporting her at school and advocating for her. One time she mentioned to me, "You're taking me to this place and you're not bringing something that I like. You forgot me." And that place and that outing was specifically for her. So I learned at that time, and she was little, she was about 4.5, and I learned at that time nothing about us without us. For that to be said, we have to involve them. They have a voice. It does not mean the loud voice with the verbal. They have an opinion and a voice, and that's the stardom of self-determination, and that's a big piece in transition. I can't wait, Paula, to discuss that next week.
Yes, we will be discussing self-determination and transition next week, because that is a very key component, not just of IEP or just transitioning into the adult world. So I want to kind of recap a little bit about what we discussed 2 weeks ago, least restrictive environment. If you remember, we had this beautiful chart which basically shows the breakdown from general education all the way down to which is the least restrictive environment, all the way down to home hospital placement, which is the most restrictive environment, if I'm correct.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so if you could kind of like just give a recap of what least restrictive means and why this is so important in the IEP process.
Once the services and support are set in the IEP document, then we will talk about where are they going to be provided, and
Okay.
that's the least restrictive environment conversation. Do know as parent that our children with IEPs, they belong first and foremost in general education.
Okay.
Now that if does not work, and it depends on the unique need of our children. Each one of our children have their unique needs. Not one size fits all, and it is not a cookie cutter model. So if a child has significant needs academically, clearly the general education setting without support will not work. So right there we kind of define without support, so it's not going to work.
One question I'm going to ask, but why is this so important? What's wrong with just having a separate wouldn't it be easier to learn if if all the children autism are in one class and all the children Down syndrome are in another class? What's the need for this inclusion?
Well, that's what IDEA, and the least restrictive environment is one of the principles of IDEA. And the definition, as I'm quoting it from the law itself, and grant you, Paula had stated that we are not a legal team or a legal agency. However, I'm just reading and quoting. To the maximum extent, all children with disabilities must be educated with non-disabled peer. So that is the least restrictive environment definition, but to the maximum extent, right there it says depends on the needs of the student.
Okay.
And to the maximum extent, if the children with disabilities can and are able to be in those environments, it is very good. Research and evidence-based studies has shown that children who are in least restrictive environment, they are more successful going to the real world because there is no special real world out there.
Right, it's just the real world.
My definition, and as a parent myself, I would like for my child to be in those inclusive environment. First of all, for social emotional support, she will have a model of non-disabled peer. Secondly, she will build up that self-confidence as she goes along, and the least restrictive environment is good for those that is appropriate for them, because we have to kind of make sure we use the language of the law appropriate. And the least restrictive environment may not be appropriate for some children or young adults who had high needs. And I don't like to use significant because all disabilities are different one from the other. It may be different on many levels or one level. It depends on how that impact. That's what we have to look at, the impact of the disability on the child functioning and learning within the general education environment, which is first the natural education environment for all children. But like my child cannot be in general education all day. It's overwhelming. She have a sensory overload. She had real big gaps in comprehension. It's going to take a while for her to get it, so she will not be able to catch up right there and then. So she need that smaller setting.
It's not appropriate for her to
It is not appropriate to meet her needs and be successful and meet her goals.
But also, I also want to add to that students who may not have a disability, it's actually helpful to students without disabilities to be in the classroom with students with disabilities. I think it helps build I would say, I don't want to use the word compassionate society, but, it adds to like a more inclusive society. You with whatever you're exposed with as a child, that's what you carry on with into adulthood. So, having everyone segregated into different classrooms, when it's appropriate, I think it would be phenomenal, as much as possible for everyone to be in that general setting.
It is a decision by the team, by the way.
Absolutely.
That placement, it is under the umbrella of LRE. It is the decision of the team. Sometimes as parents, we go with the mindset of the place before the services.
That's correct.
Special education is a set of services and support before placement. So we are talking about the what my child need and how is it going to be provided. Then the last thing that we need to discuss is where it's going to be provided. So I emphasize that intensively because if we go the other way around, we are not going to accomplish what our children needs. The first thing is the needs to be addressed and the concerns has to be addressed. Then we talk about the placement.
Absolutely. So to kind of discuss how least restrictive, to go beyond least restrictive environment, what are the tools that a student may need to assist them? So what are the special considerations?
Beside the present level that we discussed and the assessment, the evaluation, and all of that data that we need to kind of craft that program, we need those special consideration depending on the needs.
Okay.
If there are behavioral needs, the team must get together and discuss how that behavior is getting in the way of the child's learning. The first step is to assess the function of the behavior, to state what are the things that were implemented, and say how did it work or did it work at all before we jump to the next step, which is the behavior intervention plan. By the way, you can find the information in the parent education right at ISB, and I believe Paula, great, you have it. And that's chapter 9. This is a great resource. It's a very good, easy reading. Chapter 9, it emphasizes how that behavior intervention plan is supposed to be, after the assessment. And it has to summarize the finding of the functional behavior assessment. It has to summarize the prior intervention and the implementation. Describe any behaviors and intervention to be used, including those aimed to develop and strengthen all the alternative or more appropriate behaviors. In other words, we are talking about the positive behavioral supports.
Okay.
I am big on one model that I kind of like and I use. It's not kind of marketing this. It's the positive behavior intervention support, PBIS. In Illinois, you can Google it through the Midwest PBIS, and they have so much information that can be implemented in the classroom and in the community and at home. And folks, parent, please communicate with your child teacher and the school what is working at home.
Okay, so you mentioned behavior, so and that does fall under the special consideration. So I just want to pull up a list of
Sure, and there is more than the behavior. I kind of want to define. I want to define each one of them.
Behavior is a big one.
Correct. Yes.
But it is separate in the IEP. So
yes.
You don't automatically get a behavior plan with your child's IEP. That's a different consideration, and it requires an evaluation.
It does require an assessment, a functional behavior assessment. They call it the FBA, and it requires a data collection. And that data collection may take between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on each school district. But most importantly, they're looking at the function of the behavior. Some of the kids, their communication is behavior.
Right.
And I cannot talk, I cannot say what I need to say, so my behavior is a form of communication. Some of the kiddos, they have the behavior to just get attention.
So when we use the word behavior, before I go any further, does it always necessarily mean
negative,
violent or negative? Or?
No, not necessary.
Yeah, let's clear that up, because when I hear behavior, I automatically think of somebody throwing something across the room.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paula. I like this because sometimes we'll perceive behavior as a negative things. It is impeding the students' learning in the educational environment. Also, it is impeding the other students, his classmates, for example. The behavior does not necessarily to be physicalities from hitting, biting, or all of those things. It may be a simple tick.
Okay.
For those who have problems with ticks, it may be just getting up from the seat. Behavior can be refusal to do the work.
Could it be like maybe stuttering when the student becomes nervous, or
stuttering can be a behavior, but that fall under the umbrella of communication, and I will cover that under the special consideration. That will involve related services. It's like a huge
and let's pull that up
spectrum,
now.
And we're talking about these things. But I really like this question, and I thank you for saying it, because the perception of behavior is negative things. But they are not. There are things that impede the child's learning in their natural education environment, and we call it behavior. We use different methods and techniques to address those. Most importantly, we need to know what is the function of the behavior. If the students stutter before they say what they need to say, and it looks like behavior, then we need to intervene by communication supports and involve the related service providers such as speech pathologists to say, hey, he stuttered. What can you do? On the other hand, that stuttering will cause some emotional distress. We have to involve another provider, social workers, to say, okay, I am uncomfortable when I am in a group of students. How can that, be addressed? By making sure that the student have that self-confidence and build that self-confidence, from the bottom up, or scaffolding, if you would like to say.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad that we clarified. But we have to identify in the IEP the provision of supports for the student for the behaviors.
And I'm going to pull that list up again. We had a list of special considerations, which include communication needs. I think you addressed that a little bit.
I will address it, but I will go, if you want, I can go through the list that you have. The communication needs of a student, like the stuttering, for example, must be considered by the IEP team, and it has to be considered also when there are linguistic problem. When I say linguistic and cultural problem, for non-speaking English. When the kid hear another language at home and in the classroom they are hearing English, of course there is a huge difference. So we need to address those cultural and linguistic needs. Also, the family must have that support by providing the documents and all the information in the native language of the family to help. That stuttering portion that you brought as the behavior, because I am anxious, for example, or something like that, it is a behavior, but it's also a communication need that needs to be addressed by a service provider.
Okay.
So these are the things that we can underline and highlight through the communication need. Assistive technology is a biggie. Everybody talk about assistive technology. It encompasses a whole lot of things. It is from low tech to high tech. When I say low tech, it can be just a grip on a pencil.
Okay.
It can be just an enlarged, calculator because of my child's sensory needs. She need that large calculator, the little buttons are large. For kiddos who had really fine motor skills, they need a specific enlarged keyboard, for example, for keyboarding, or simple as adaptive paper, modified paper. You got the real word, adaptive paper. It's modified paper. It can go all the way to the high tech, which is providing a device actually to see if it will help.
Like a Dynavox, or do they still?
The Dynavox will fall under the communication needs as well, and also assistive technology. It's a dual. It's an overlap.
So as you see, a couple of these are overlapping. So
it's overlapping, but it is good for the parent to understand these things. The Dynavox is an augmentative communication device. It is just for communication, to say what they need to say. But there are the assistive technology for writing, for example, to sit on a cushion. That's an assistive technology support. A cane, if a student hurt themselves and they need a specific cane to get up or whatever the case may be, that's an assistive technology. Chromebooks, for those who does not have a nice, handwriting or dyslexia, there is a specific disability for handwriting. They can use, a tool to type and do all of those things that we do at work. The Google Drive.
Right.
It's amazing. I've seen 4th graders and 5th graders with Google Drive. I was fascinated.
Siri. Assistive technology.
Siri, and you saw it at the conference last week, how that young person, adult young person with autism, how that Siri was helping him to give him the guidance that he needed for weather, if you remember.
Yep.
And for the travel, and also the time of his flight, and how much the time elapsed. That had amazed me. Siri was telling him,
and helping him with just basic conversation pieces.
Not only that, it told him, okay, your flight is at 11:35. With the traffic, you have to leave at 10:50. So they gave him the elapsed time. So the technology it's very good.
And very vast.
Very vast, and like I said, it encompasses from low to high tech.
Right.
But parent, please look at the layer of your child's disability and the impact. We can order and we can request anything, but will it be appropriate? We all the time focus on appropriateness. Following your list, Braille. It is clear for those who had visual impairment. They have now really ways and means that had been developed, for those who had visual impairment. And if the child have those needs, the school is mandated to provide these extra support or the special consideration. For the ELL, which is the limited English proficiency, because I want to leave the autism spectrum consideration last. The limited English consideration, which you have put it in the last, there are kids who hear another language at home.
Okay.
So the school are mandated to provide that ELL, which is the English language proficiency learner. So they are not proficient, so we have to give them that extra support by accommodations.
Okay.
If that English language learner is not proficient because of linguistic problem, that's a fall under communication needs. And I say this very clearly because I have dealt with it with a couple of families that are supported, and through the evaluation, it was not an ELL issue. It was a communication need, where linguistically the kids start having those deficits in communication because I'm hearing another language at home and I'm coming to school here in English, so I don't know what are you saying. Basically, the ELL has to provide those support through related service and through, of course, our accommodations. The autism spectrum disorder, they have a lot of consideration, and it covers the verbal, nonverbal communication need, and all of this information you will find it in the book.
Absolutely.
At this guide, the social interaction, the behavior, the change of routine. It's a lot of information that you can find in Chapter 6, the IEP. It encompasses more than 7 criteria, and you can discuss it with the team, and they will make the decision whether they are relevant or irrelevant.
Okay, so we are down to, actually probably should have been done 10 seconds ago. So we want to thank you for joining us on FRCD CAN TV. Thank you, Zabita.
You are very welcome.
And we look forward to talking again with you next week. Have a wonderful week.
Have a wonderful week.